The first third will be a presentation about the report itself. Then we're going to have some comments about the issue from 4 individuals who I'll introduce at the time. We're delighted to have a wide spectrum of interest and support. And then we'll have a Q&A for the last third. So if you have questions about the report, if you can just hold them and perhaps put them in the chat, I'll try and come to as many of those as we can. We'll have plenty of time for questions, but we'll hold them till the end. So without more ado, I'd like to introduce to you Richard Purves, who is a Senior Research Fellow at the Institute of Social Marketing at the University of Stirling. Richard and his colleague, Nathan Critchlow, have a well-established pedigree of work in the area of links between alcohol and sport, and we're delighted that he's going to outline this report entitled Alcohol Sponsorship of Football. Over to you, Richard.
Okay, thank you very much, Alastair. Thanks for the introduction. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. I'm hoping everything will work smoothly here. Let's just see. I'm hoping you can all see that now. If you can't, someone let me know. So I'm here, yes, to talk about, sorry, should we slideshow? There we go. I'm here to talk about our report, which has been introduced. It's examining the nature of sponsorship relations for professional football teams across countries with varied restrictions on alcohol marketing. Bit of a lengthy title, so we'll just call it Alcohol Sponsorship of Sport. As Alastair's introduced, it was conducted by 3 of us at the Institute for Social Marketing and Health, myself, Dr. Nathan Critchlow, and Amber Morgan, who's also on the webinar today. So I'll just get straight into it. So a short introduction. We've mentioned it before, but you know, what is marketing? Sponsorship is part of marketing, but maybe quickly outline what marketing is for those of you maybe not familiar with it. You know, it's the main source of communication between a brand and consumers. And research has shown that awareness of engagement with alcohol marketing is associated with increased likelihood of alcohol consumption amongst young people. And there's also increasing awareness of the impact of marketing on other vulnerable groups, for example, dependent drinkers or those in recovery. And as I mentioned, one form of alcohol marketing is sponsorship, and sponsorship provides a highly effective, high-profile, high-reach platform for alcohol companies to produce their products and brands. Now, alcohol sponsorship or sponsorship is an umbrella term, encompasses a range of marketing practices, including but not limited to shirt sponsorship, advertising across stadiums, for example, electronic hoardings around the pitch, exclusive porridge rights within stadiums, within fan zones, limited edition products that feature the names of teams, their achievements, tournaments, that kind of thing, a presence on social media channels, and players, managers featuring in advertisements, marketing campaigns, that kind of thing, and obviously branded products as well. So it covers a wide range of things. When we think about alcohol sponsorship, maybe we think of the most high profile things, but it's a very wide range of things. And there's 2 approaches to controlling alcohol sponsorship. Controls in alcohol marketing, including sponsorship, are listed by the WHO as one of their 3 best buy policies to reduce the harmful use of alcohol. And most countries within the WHO European region have some controls in place for alcohol marketing. So some countries have implemented statutory controls imposed by governments, whereas other countries have self-regulatory controls overseen by the alcohol and or marketing industries. United Kingdom, for instance, sponsorship is largely self-regulated by a representative body of alcohol producers, so the Portman Group in the first instance. And there's limited evidence on the extent of alcohol sports sponsorship in various European countries, and to what extent different approaches to restricting alcohol sports sponsorship impacts on the sponsorship arrangements of the football clubs in these countries. So in response to this report had 2 research objectives. The first was to examine the extent of alcohol sports sponsorship in the top tier of professional football across various European nations. And secondly, to explore what extent different approaches to restricting alcohol sports sponsorship impacts on the sponsorship arrangements of football clubs in these countries. So what we did was an open source audit of the main sponsors and or partners of professional football teams and leagues in 10 European countries. So it was a purposive sample of 10 European countries, and they were selected to represent varied league size and profile, geographical distribution, and different regulatory approaches for alcohol sponsorship. So you can see here in the table, these were the countries that we sampled and the number of teams in each of these leagues. So Belgium, England, France, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, Norway, Scotland, Spain, and Sweden. And all the data that we captured relates to the 2021-2022 season, so the season just passed there. And you can see the number of teams there, and it came to a total of 178 teams across the 10 leagues. And if we look at thinking about different restrictions, so where was alcohol sponsorship actually allowed? Where was it permitted? It was permitted in Belgium, England, not in France, Germany, Italy, Netherlands. In Norway, there's restrictions around sports sponsorship. Scotland, Spain, and Sweden. So this was as per the restrictions listed in country profiles on the UCAM website. Sweden has wider restrictions on alcohol advertising, but within that, sports sponsorship appears to still be permitted. So you can see the range of countries there. And consistent with a previous study, where we examined sports sponsorship among professional sports teams in Scotland, we were looking to identify companies or organisations which were presented as the main sponsors or official partners of each club or league. And we also looked at the sponsors of the leagues in each of these countries as well, the Top Flight League as well, I should mention the Top Flight Men's League. So what we did was we visited the official website of each team and the league and captured information on their main sponsors or partners. So mostly there was either a principal partners kind of main sponsors page, or there was also main sponsors which would be on the main homepage. And the main sponsors and partners were included, but were not restricted to the premium principal partners, shirt or kit sponsors, stadium partners, official partners or suppliers. There was different tiered levels of sponsorship within some clubs as well, the business partners, network media partners. So there was a real wide range across the countries that we looked at, and even within the teams within those countries. It wasn't all uniform, it wasn't all the same kind of structure. So we had to limit it to certain levels of sponsorship, because some of them went very, very low down. But these were the main things that we covered. It was the main sponsors, main partners. So just to go on to our main findings. Well, we identified 7,807 main sponsors and partners across 178 teams. So if you think about them as the individual lines of coding and data there, you can see how much work was actually involved in this. And it's all credit to our colleague Amber Morgan, who went through all this coding for us. Now, of these, 2.6% of the sponsors were judged to be alcohol related. Although, as you can see from the graph, this ranged across the countries. You can see Belgium there, 7.4% of sponsors were alcohol related. Scotland 6.4%, in England 5.5%, Spain 4.7%, Netherlands 3.1%, Germany 2.5%, Italy 2.5%, France 1.9%, Norway 0.8%, and Sweden 0.6%. And you can also see there we've highlighted which countries where alcohol sports sponsorship was not permitted. And almost all of the alcohol-related sponsors that we identified, so 93.5%, were producers, distributors, or brands. So that's as opposed to a no-low alcohol brand or a licensed premises such as a bar or a pub, which some of the sponsors were. And of the 178 teams audited, we found that 72.5% of those teams had at least one main sponsor or partner related to alcohol. And again, you can highlight there, our first research question, do restrictions impact on alcohol sponsorship? Sorry, our second one. This study provides some evidence that they do. Teams from countries identified as having no statutory restrictions tended to have a higher proportion of alcohol-related sponsors than teams in France and Norway, where restrictions do exist. So in Belgium's First Division A, for example, it was 7.4% of all the main sponsors partners were identified to be alcohol-related. And the title sponsor of the league was actually an alcohol producer distributor as well. So conversely, in Norway and France, both of these countries already have statutory controls. Only a smaller proportion of the main sponsors were deemed to be alcohol related. And the lower proportion of sponsors for teams in Sweden suggests that having wider restrictions on alcohol marketing may have also had an indirect effect on alcohol sponsorship because they were obviously the lowest in that table there. The report comes with some important caveats. The first is that the presence or absence of statutory controls doesn't appear to be the sole determinant of alcohol-related sponsorship. So, for example, I've got the example here of Germany and England. Neither Germany nor England have statutory controls on alcohol sponsorship, but despite this, the proportion of main sponsors or partners for the teams in Germany's Bundesliga that were judged to be alcohol-related was 2.5%, and that's almost half of those related to be alcohol-related in England's Premier League, over half, sorry, under. Moreover, while the Premier League itself had a main sponsor or partner judged to be alcohol-related, the Bundesliga did not. And the same was true when we compared the Netherlands and Scotland, both similar size countries, both similar size leagues, but the proportion of alcohol-related sponsors in those countries was very different. So therefore, it appears that other cultural, commercial factors might also determine the degree of alcohol sponsorship in those countries. The second caveat is that a small degree of alcohol sponsorship was still observed in countries with statutory controls, so namely in Norway and in France. For both countries, most of these main sponsors or partners were related to, again, producers, distributors, brands of alcoholic drinks. But this finding is consistent with previous studies which we've done, and there's an example there of the study we did on the alcohol marketing during UEFA 2016, Euro 2016. It's consistent that things that we purported that alcohol brand cues do appear during sport, even in countries that have statutory controls. Our previous research reported that alibi marketing was used to circumvent the Vivenne law during both UEFA 2016 finals and during rugby tournaments that have been held in France. And now, important caveat, we're not suggesting that relationships observed that we've found here are in breach of the law in either country. That's a matter to be determined by their own respective monitoring and enforcement bodies. So just to finish up, in conclusion, we found the extent of alcohol sponsorship across European countries with varying approaches to alcohol marketing is complex. We found that alcohol sponsors made up a small percentage of all the main sponsors or partners identified, but 3/4 of the teams were still observed to have at least one main sponsor or partner related to alcohol. In this study, we can't determine the financial value of these relationships, so we don't know the revenue that these sponsors bring in, or the sponsorship activity involved. We just know that they were present as sponsors. Our data broadly supports the hypothesis that countries with statutory controls have comparatively less alcohol sponsorship. Differences between countries, particularly where no statutory controls exist, suggest that wider cultural and commercial factors are also likely to be an important determinant. Some alcohol sponsorship is still observed in countries with statutory controls. So, for example, in Norway and France, although whether that's compliant, as I've said, with the legislation is a matter for each of the country's enforcement authorities. So I'll just finish up there. If you'd like any more information, obviously the report is available. I would encourage you to go check it out if you haven't already. It's available on the SHAAP website. And I'd just like to thank SHAAP for commissioning this report and to thank my colleagues at the Institute for Social Marketing and Health. And there's my contact details and the ISM Twitter page as well, if you'd like to get in touch with anything. So thank you very much. I'll just end the slideshow there, and hopefully I can stop sharing quite easily.
Thank you very much, Richard. That's a very nice summary of a lot of work and helpful, I think, to provide a platform to discuss the question of alcohol sponsorship in football specifically, but also applicable to more generally football and rugby being the two most watched sports, certainly here in Scotland. And I guess that it's any question of restricting marketing, such as sponsorship, is obviously going to be a political hot potato. Most of you will be aware that last week the Scottish Government have launched their long-awaited consultation on ways in which we in Scotland might restrict alcohol marketing as something which is of proven benefit to reduce alcohol harm. And so I'm delighted that we have a senior politician here in the form of Henry McLeish. You don't need me to remind you that Henry is a former First Minister of Scotland, and has an authoritative political voice. But we're particularly grateful to have Henry because he has a passionate interest in Scottish football. He published a wide review of Scottish football just over 10 years ago, and is involved in another review just now with the Scottish Football Supporters Association. And so we're delighted to have Henry with us, who's going to say a few words about his view of this important topic. Over to you, Henry. You're muted. Henry, you're still muted.
Henry, there should be a button that's asking you to unmute at the top.
Hello. Sorry, the whole screen disappeared, and forgive me, my technology is a bit limited. But thanks, Chair, for the introduction. No, I mean, let me just say I want to be very brief and speak from a common sense perspective, because I think this is a situation where common sense is just colliding with commercial interests. And my points are very simple, that I've always looked upon sport, especially football, since I've been from the last, I think, 70 years, been interested in football in one way or another. And it is about fitness, it is about health, it is about mental well-being. It's all of the things that we take for granted that contribute to healthy individuals and a healthy society. Now, despite the fact it is legal and people can enjoy it, I do think there is a direct contradiction between the alcohol industry and sport. It seems to me that's the common sense perspective on which I've based my contribution to SHAAP's work recently. And I think that's the one that should actually hit home, because during my involvement in a practical way in playing professional football, and also as a politician and as a human being interested in it, it strikes me that the commercial interest here has really no status at all. And first of all, I hear people say, well, we need the money. But that's not an argument for the commercialization of the game through alcohol. I believe that when we hear that, it's a sign of kind of desperation. I know personally that Scottish football is not financially in good shape, as is the case with most other countries. But that's not, I think, the main idea behind looking for financial sponsorship at any cost. So the second point for me is I have a simple view of life, that if the game was more attractive to Scottish society generally, Scottish industry, Scottish commerce, then we would attract sponsorship that had no connections with alcohol. Now, I know in the world that we live in, that could be described as oversimplistic. But on the other hand, why is the government getting involved? Why might the government seek to regulate? Because they have an interest in the common good. And the common good is only served by us looking at issues like sport and commercialization and taking a firm stand and saying, look, we're not banning this. We're not curtailing freedoms. We're actually pointing out that A, alcohol doesn't contribute anything to sport, mentally or physically. And B, this is for the benefit of the sponsors, not for the game. So I'd like to think that the SFA, the SPFL, anyone associated with the game would understand the very excellent presentations we've had and we're having, but also just to turn on that common sense part of the brain, which suggests that when we had tobacco, we got rid of that in the game. We now have alcohol. Now, whether people believe or disbelieve that that is worse or better, that's irrelevant. It seems to me that this could be done quite successfully. And when the government are talking about a consultation, that should really be the lead to the alcohol industry and to the football and to sport generally, that the government is interested in the wider good. And of course, that has to overcome partial interest at any particular time. So I just believe that the campaign that's been running is a good one. It's a sound one. It does get to the heart of what sport has enduringly meant for me over the last 60 to 70 years, and I don't see why that should change. Now, on a completely other and controversial issue, a lot of people talk about gambling. Now, that's not for today, but it's really, I think, when we talk about tobacco, alcohol, gambling, we actually have to look at the interests of the sport first, because that contributes to all of our well-being. And secondly, then, we see what can be done either to take it out of sport or indeed to control it. So my common sense overture to both the government and to the sports side, and especially football, look, forget all the complicated arguments. This is about common sense. We want healthy youngsters, healthy adults. And if we could play our part in reducing the exposure of alcohol generally to the Scottish public, then that would be a very significant step forward for us. Chairman, thank you for that.
Thank you very much for those very wise words, Henry. Some very important points there. I'm sure that a lot of people will have a lot to say, both about Richard's presentation and about Henry's thoughts there. But as I say, we'll keep the discussion for the end, and we'll carry on with some further interventions. Henry's made the point about football being an activity which is healthy, good for mental well-being, and I think that we're now, thankfully, in an era when it's recognised that football is for all, not just for men. And Scottish women's football, as many may know, but many may not know, has been an exemplar in terms of adopting exactly the sort of approach which Henry has suggested to the question of sponsorship. SHAAP are delighted to be one of the sponsors for Scottish women's football, and I'm delighted to introduce Vivenne McLaren, who's the chair of Scottish women's football, to talk about this.
Thank you very much indeed for having me. It's always a pleasure to speak among this community, and thank you for your words, Mr. McLeish. It was certainly resonated with me. I will just share my screen. 1 second. Okay, can we all see that? All see that? Can you see that, Chairman? Yeah. Okay. So I think something that really resonated with me there from Mr. McLeish was common sense. And in 2016, I joined the SWF board in 2014, and we were, we inherited a bit of a mess, suffice to say. The board had previously been mostly coaches. There was not a balance of business and football on there. So it was completely restructured, and there was a board created with football directors and business directors, and I originally joined as a business director and have been chair since 2016. And we had no sponsors, no brands, no one was interested in women's football. It didn't really have a very professional positioning at that point. And one of the first things that I did in my side was get all the competitions rebranded, look at all of the values that we had, so that no matter what age group people were at, they could be proud of participating in women's football, no matter what league, whether that was the Women's Premier League, whether that was the under-9s. We wanted everyone to be excited to take part. So from that point on, we got our first sponsor in 2016, and it was at that point where I was getting approaches from gambling organisations and alcohol organisations. And, you know, bluntly, as Mr. McLeish stated, common sense needs to prevail. And when you have an organisation that runs now 85 competitions across the whole of Scotland, and you have 90% of your registered players under the age of 18, it makes absolutely no sense. Even if they were, you know, even when we're looking at the Women's Premier League, it still doesn't make any sense. We are all about, you know, getting women and girls into sport is a huge challenge. Up to the age of 10, girls participate more in sport than boys. After the age of 10, that drops off. So there are many challenges that girls and women face, not only in participating, but also coming back to sport. So it's extremely important from a Scottish women's football perspective. And as Mr. McLeish also said, within football and sport, it's about well-being, physical well-being, mental well-being, and trying to support girls as they progress through their pathway, whether that be recreational football and kick about with their friends, or whether they want to accelerate to a more, you can be a professional footballer if you're a woman in Scotland now, which is something that we've been trying to do for years, and we can now do that. So we've achieved a lot. But ultimately, in 2018, we were speaking to SHAAP about some research that they were looking at doing to benchmark boys and girls at certain stages. And it became a conversation around, actually, how can we support you as Scottish Women's Football, which was absolutely wonderful. And since 2018, SHAAP have sponsored our National Performance League, which is the elite end of the youth setup, essentially. So that continues to flourish, as do the participants of that league. So one of the reasons that we were doing it, and a big part of, for me, a sponsor doesn't just come in and write a check and walk away. And I think that's a very prevalent feature of men's sports, especially football. Write a check, walk away, brand on the front. I want some pitch side advertising. I'll maybe bring some clients. That's it. We're about partnership, and actually, what can we do with our partners? How are we communicating what that partner's all about, how they're going to deliver? How do we push those educational messages through? And that's why women's sport generally is different, because we have a slightly different lens on it. The people that come to watch women's football is very much a family affair of all ages. Obviously, we're trying to be very forthright in terms of our role models, and little girls and little boys can look up to female players. And we've seen little boys at games and they have their favourite player on the back that's actually a female player, because at that age, little boys just love their favourite player. They're not, our culture hasn't ingrained into them that, oh, that's a female player, that's a male player. So, a big part of our partnership was research with our National Performance League players. And there was a survey that was done in 2022 to really look at insights and attitudes towards alcohol consumption. And I think, I could talk about this for about 3 hours, and I'm happy to do so if anyone wants to. We'll have a break in between, obviously. But the survey results really for us are a constant reminder as to why this partnership, and also why the Scottish Government have taken a view which is looking at the common good. What can we do for our communities? Because we know that not every single person that consumes alcohol has an addiction problem. The same with gambling. But what is the point in promoting these, these things to audiences that really are, young, can be led astray, and actually need to understand actually what makes them tick, and how to think about their own well-being and their own physical and mental health. So I think the results that we saw from that were, just underpinned everything that I've said. They have an opinion on the subject, 92% support our stance that we reject alcohol. We also reject gambling. That's a whole other conversation, as was mentioned. 87% feel drinking can negatively impact their performance. I think the first survey was done on players that were in, I think, the under-19 setup previously a couple of years back, and they did not want to drink alcohol because they wanted to get into the first team, and they wanted to be able to be a role model like the players in the first team. And non-drinkers were more likely to be aware of a football picture with alcohol than drinkers, and 76% believes that believe football makes them less likely to drink, which is a very interesting finding. So overall, at Scottish Women's Football, we have a duty to our members and for the common good to make sure that young girls, families, parents, carers are, getting positive messages from us, as well as being able to participate in the game that they love. So that's a very core part of our strategy as we move forward, and as we bring partners on board. They're not knocking the door down, but I would certainly say that since we took this stance, there's been many, many more people come forward wanting to support us, which is fantastic, because we don't get any government funding, because we're an affiliated national association affiliated to the Scottish FA. So anyway, thank you very much. Hugely important to me personally and to us as an organisation, and we're very grateful for SHAAP's support, and happy to always talk about the importance of this to the wider community.
Thank you very much, Vivenne. Again, wise words, emphasising the youth component, I think, which is so vital, and demonstrating the positive aspects, not just the absence of alcohol in terms of the absence of money coming in, but the positive aspects of not having an alcohol environment to the participants, and I mean the players and the whole group, spectators, supporters, etc. as well. That aspect of vulnerable people, both Richard and Vivenne touched on the exposure for youth, and Richard also mentioned the question of another group who are potentially disadvantaged by alcohol marketing in general is patients or individuals in recovery who have got over their alcohol problem. Tom Bennett is the Rights and Recovery Officer at the Scottish Recovery Consortium, as well as being on the board of our sister organisation, Alcohol Focus Scotland. Tom is somebody in recovery himself and is very well qualified to speak on that aspect of the matter. Over to you, Tom.
Alastair, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thankfully, today this is a remote event because please excuse me, I'm full of the cold. So it's a real pleasure to be here this morning amongst such an esteemed company, and to have the opportunity to just briefly highlight, I suppose, what for me is the real human impact of the alcohol industry's ability to have such a highly visible and effective marketing tool as sports sponsorship. I shan't go into the gory details of my own story, but suffice to say that I had a kind of daily dependence on alcohol for about 15 years, and I feel very fortunate to have survived that. And I've now, in over 12 years of continuous abstinent recovery, and in my recovery, I've worked in various residential rehabs and recovery community development, and now, as Alastair said, I'm working for a national organisation to build awareness and understanding of our human rights as people in recovery. And I think that when I'm speaking to people with lived experience, I think it's extremely universally held opinion that marketing is an important and influential tool that triggers. It's an extremely effective tool to trigger desire to drink. So for somebody in recovery, for somebody in early recovery, if I was in rehab myself or working in rehab, I would either have been advised or to advise people, please stay away from triggers. Please stay away from the alcohol aisle in the supermarket. Please stay. But you can't advise people not to participate and not to engage in what is their favourite sport, and to go along to enjoy sporting events, which many of us love to do. And I was at Murrayfield earlier this year, and I hadn't been for a long time, and I was absolutely astonished to see the amount of alcohol advertising everywhere. And I had taken my 9-year-old daughter there, and I think it's got to such a point now that I would think twice again about exposing my daughter to such a bombardment of alcohol advertising and the whole culture around there. So marketing makes us drink. It's extremely effective, and that's why the industry invests so much money in marketing. And as my previous speakers have mentioned, the message conveyed by marketing is that alcohol is life enhancing, and this is at odds with the health risks attached to alcohol, and particularly in relation to sports. And I remember as a young boy watching my sporting heroes, whether it be football or rugby, and seeing them branded in alcohol brands, and that's an extremely influential thing for a young boy to see. And later on in life, when I had unfortunately developed a problem with alcohol myself, the exposure, the perpetual exposure to alcohol marketing and advertising and sponsorship served in some sense to normalise and justify what had become an unhealthy and harmful relationship. And you know, I know that, I mean, I think it's got to a point in Scottish society today where I feel, as somebody who abstains from alcohol, that I am in the, it's almost considered socially unacceptable not to drink, and that certain brands have become really synonymous with the identity of particular sports. And I think that is something that is an indication of just, you know, how things have gone too far. We can't go and watch a game without being bombarded by marketing, as Richard so eloquently described earlier. So you know, recovery is possible. It is absolutely possible, but it's an extremely difficult thing to access without the right conditions and without the right support. And it's, you know, I have worked with hundreds of people over the years who haven't made it into recovery, and it's heartbreaking to see intelligent, caring, funny, creative people who could not move from alcohol dependence into recovery. And you know, their exposure to perpetual alcohol marketing has certainly been a part of that. And the other thing I just want to add in is that you know, the kind of the health messaging around alcohol, when we get a very one-sided message from the alcohol industry, and this whole idea about drinking responsibly, as they're allegedly you know, have to put everywhere, although it's often quite invisible. It's a cheap technique to absolve people for you know, the responsibility for drinking, and it only serves to perpetuate the stigma that people who develop a problem with alcohol have somehow personally failed. So anyway, time passes very quickly. It's been a real pleasure to be here, and it's an extreme, I'm, you know, delighted to be here today and to have a tiny little part in the launch of this report. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Tom. Very important perspective, and I think that your words put it into perspective for us as to what we're trying to achieve, really. Yes, and drink responsibly. Yes, the industry don't take responsibility, is the bottom line there. And the last of our four little presentations before we go into the discussion section is from Jane. Jane Gordon is our Policy and Public Affairs Officer here at SHAAP, and she'll be explaining to you that the campaign that we are running in relation to sports sponsorship by alcohol and other aspects of marketing. So over to you, Jane.
Thanks, Alastair. I'll just share my screen. Is everyone able to see that?
Yep.
Excellent. So thank you very much to everyone that's spoken so far. It's been great to hear about the reasons from different perspectives about the need for a restriction on alcohol sponsorship of sport in Scotland. I'm just going to give a quick overview of our campaign around this. So the campaign is called Calling Time. It was launched on the 14th of November, and it's essentially showcasing our call to the Scottish Government to implement a ban on alcohol sponsorship of sport based on the evidence that we've heard so far. So although we focused a lot around football today, we are calling for a ban on alcohol sports sponsorship across all sports. And so around our launch, we picked up significant media attention, which was brilliant. You can see a nice picture of Henry there in a BBC article. we had media attention across radio, TV and news articles, and we were trending on BBC and STV Online for quite a few days, which was excellent. We've also engaged with lots of different organisations similar to ourselves. Some football teams have signed up to the campaign, and I'll get into a little bit more about our official supporters in a moment. We've also had some brilliant political engagement so far. Last week we were exhibiting in Parliament, that was our little stall that we had. So we were there for 3 days, and we had the chance to speak to lots of MSPs, which was brilliant. And we had a little photo op and actually received cross-party support for this, which is a great indication so far. The Scottish Greens, there's Gillian Mackay there, have officially released a statement of support for us, which has been really helpful as well. And just now we have a motion from Joe Fitzpatrick, MSP, currently live, and that has 20 signatures last time I checked, across almost all parties. So politically it's looking like we're pushing an open door, which is brilliant. So in terms of what you can do to help support our campaign, firstly, you can visit our website. The link's just there, but we'll also circulate that in the chat. On the website, you can read the full report from Richard, Nathan and Amber. Our campaign briefing's also there, explaining a bit more about the reasons we're calling for a ban. And you can also gain all of the information on the evidence of why a ban is important. Also on our website, we're hosting a function called Do-Gooder, which you can see, there's a little screenshot of there, and that allows you to write to your constituency and regional MSPs just by putting in your first line of your residential address. So if you put in the first line of your address, it automatically finds your MSPs for you, and you can send there's a draft email there that you can just press send on, or if you have some time, you can personalize that slightly. We also on our website have a social media pack, which includes some infographics and draft tweets. We'd be very appreciative if you could support the campaign on Twitter and tag us at SHAAP Alcohol and #CallingTime. I know that a lot of organisations that are supporting us have done a brilliant job of that so far, so thank you to anyone that's on the call for that. And also the Scottish Government consultation opened, as Alastair touched upon already. That opened last week, I think, or was it 2 weeks ago? And so if you have some time, it would be really brilliant if you could contribute to this consultation. SHAAP will be putting in our own consultation response, which will be available on the website. So you can use that as a template, or alternatively, if you want to get in touch before that, my email address is going to be at the end. I'm very happy to have a conversation about the consultation. So we were delighted to see the start of the consultation last week. The consultation looks at all forms of alcohol marketing, but the very first question is this one here: do you think we should prohibit alcohol sports sponsorship in Scotland? So we were absolutely delighted that that's the very first thing the Scottish Government are consulting on. It's followed by two slightly more specific questions on the scope of which types of marketing should be prohibited and exemptions to this. As I say, it would be really wonderful if you could respond to that, and we're very happy to help with that. In terms of how organisations can help us with our campaign, we have a group of official supporters, which we're very grateful to, that you can see listed here. That's available on our website. If you're with an organisation that would be interested to become an official supporter, it would be wonderful if you can get in touch. My email's just there. All we would need is a short statement of support and your organisation logo. Also, if anybody has any links to football teams, we'd be delighted to join up with some more football teams. We have a few listed there already, and likewise any sort of significant sports people that are interested in the campaign. That would be absolutely brilliant. So thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, then please get in touch. Thank you. I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you, Jane. That's brought you up to date with what SHAAP are doing. This is now your opportunity to have your say and ask some questions, either to Richard and his co-authors about the aspects of their work looking at a football sponsorship with alcohol across Europe, or to any of our other speakers or myself in relation to the wider aspects of alcohol sports sponsorship here in Scotland. I will just go onto the gallery view so I can try and see at least some of you from time to time. It's difficult with so many participants, and Chloe will try and keep an eye out for me. I can maybe set the questions rolling with a question for Richard. That's a very helpful and up-to-date snapshot of what's happening at the moment. Is there any historical data to compare it to, Richard? Is sponsorship getting more prevalent or less prevalent? I mean, some people, the conversations I was having with Jane at the Scottish Parliament last week, some people will say, oh, well, you know, you don't see it so much on the football shirts anymore, it's getting less. But as Tom says, go to Murrayfield and you're swamped with it. So is it getting worse or better, or do we not know?
Officially, we don't know, because we haven't got a comparative study there. We haven't looked at it at a certain period of time there, or looked at it now. But as you correctly point out, I mean, most people would think about shirt sponsorship. And as I tried to show there, it's a wide range of things. So, you know, if we look at the World Cup at the moment, you know, we've had everything around Budweiser, and Budweiser man of the match is still huge, and Budweiser's on all the sponsor boards, and it's all around the stadium. We don't officially know, so as I say, we can't compare that, but I would assume the sponsorship relations might be, you know, might have changed slightly with new companies coming in, particularly with the advent of gambling, you know, which is perhaps a more visible sponsor. But you know, it's safe to say that, as we've shown, you know, it's still around, and it's still a main sponsor of a lot of football clubs around Europe.
One point I wanted to follow up with on that one from that question, if this would help. I know of a Premier League football team in Scotland that charges in excess of £2 million a year for the pouring rights within the stadium, which was news to me. So that's income that's coming from having the pouring rights across the entire stadium. So it's hidden. It's a bit more hidden unless you're actually in there, you know, in front of a bar or buying, you know, but there are pouring rights across stadiums, despite the fact that, you know, that'll be in hospitality, and if they're holding events there that are maybe unrelated to football to generate income, there are massive deals around for pouring rights, which was news to me and quite worrying as well.
Thanks for that, Vivenne. That's important information. I have a question from Eleanor Jane, our SHAAP director, and then Justina after that. So Eleanor first.
I was just wanting to ask about views around the strength of the alcohol industry, I guess. We know that there's a political appetite, or certainly a political willingness, there appears to be, to our calls alongside others for a ban on alcohol sports sponsorship. But we know from past experience in Scotland, but across Europe, that the alcohol industry and the advertising industry and others with an interest in this, the football bodies, will all be out in force over the coming months to try and water this down, if not stop it in its tracks. So I guess my question really is aimed at Henry McLeish as a seasoned politician as to what we can do to counter the depth of the pockets that the alcohol industry and others will bring to this debate.
Henry, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, no, this is the best question, because in a sense, you're dealing with corporates who have great experience, great knowledge. And of course, the interesting point is that few of them are interested in football or any other sport, but it provides a mass audience immediately, quickly, without much thinking. So they're going to fight to carry that on in their own commercial interest. What I think we need to do is to work on this point that I mentioned earlier, that why does football, sorry, I keep talking about football, but make that any sport. Why would football want to go to get sponsorship from alcohol? The answer is it's easy. And currently, with the argument that the game needs finance, then, you know, that won't stop. But what I think we have to do is not only speak to the SFA and the SPFL, but let's also accept that the Scottish League is 42 clubs. And then in addition to Vivenne, which I must apologise because I didn't really talk about specifically the women's game, that you have all these emerging clubs. You have a lot of clubs at the elite level, you have a lot of kids playing football in schools and whatever. And I think what we have got to do is to make this a mass campaign on those who feel that alcohol contributes nothing to sport, which I think is unarguable. And secondly, we say to the clubs, the leagues, whatever, in any sport, you could do better. You don't have to go there. I have a continuing struggle with the SFA and SPFL because they do things, and when suggested you should do something else, you're being a killjoy, or as one paper suggested, part of the woke culture, which I thought that was really quite ingenious and quite complimentary in a way. So that's where I think the focus of the camp has to be, not to try and change the activities and actions of the sponsors who are in it for commercial reasons, and to concentrate on those who are receiving finance, but then maybe say that what we should do is have a collective effort to say, you're being sponsored by alcohol X, let's go to non-alcohol Y in the community and find out that why you can't attract good investment into the game, which not only provides something in itself, but complements the healthy living, mental and physical. And this idea that Vivenne again raised about the common good. We need a Scotland that's built on ideas which are shared, not ideas which are then attacked by various commercial interests. So I'm quite happy to think that we can win here. And of course, the government becomes the other potential focus. There's a lot of excellent people in all the parties in the Scottish Parliament. This is another one where we could step forward internationally. We were the 4th country in the world to ban smoking in public places. We then had a situation where we've looked at health more seriously than the rest of the United Kingdom. This to me could be another notch for the Scottish government, the Scottish parliamentary system, to say, in the interest of health, sport, and mental health in particular, we're not having it, and put the ban through. Sounds draconian, sounds dramatic, it will be pilloried for that, but so what? I mean, let's have a good struggle and a good campaign on this.
Thanks, Henry. Thanks, Henry. I also like your idea of that, you know, there's a chicken and egg thing here, that the more clean your sport is, look at the example of Scottish women's football, the more attractive it is to other sponsors. And, you know, that's maybe, that takes a bit longer to build up a head of steam on that, but that's a very good selling point.
And also, just as a postscript to your comment, I mean, I don't think it's a very good marketing theme for Scottish football to be saying, we're desperate.
Yes,
I'm sorry, you know, folks, we're desperate, so therefore we're going the alcohol route, and we're still in the gambling route. We got rid of tobacco, but that was a bit too severe for anyone. So I do think that there's a conscience to be played on.
Time is short. Thanks, Henry. Justina.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Justina Murray, CEO of Scottish Families Affected by Alcohol and Drugs. And I had a bit of a comment and a bit of a question, and it was really about the wider media narrative around alcohol and football. And we saw all the headlines from Qatar when there was a very last minute decision to ban alcohol within the stadiums. And also my team have reflected on the kind of media coverage where there's a big match. Thinking back to the Rangers and Seville game earlier on this year, all of the media pictures were of, like, you know, people drinking in the streets and, you know, people drinking in bars at home. And that's really the imagery and the narrative that accompanies this. But we didn't see that with the Women's Euros in the summer, and it's just not the same narrative for women's football. And so what I was wondering is there proactive work with the wider media on this around women's football, or is it just starting in a really different place, which just shows that another narrative is possible?
I think it's just starting from a different place. I think the kind of demographic that comes to games is as I kind of mentioned earlier, it's much more family based. There's more kids that attend, and it's just you know, we would try and have, you know, family fun days before the finals. You know, last year when we had our cup final in November at Firhill, we had a big family day before that. We had Santa there. We gave away like 400 selection boxes. You get your face painted. There were elves, you know. So we try and make it a bit of an occasion and an event. But I think, yes, I think that's just where it's coming from. And so we're trying to maintain that and keep that going, despite the Lionesses, I think, have got Budweiser as one of theirs. But I think to go back to Mr. McLeish's point, and I put it in the chat, many brands that come and talk to us find men's football and some men's sport toxic because of the gambling and alcohol presence. If you then say, well, actually, we're taking that out, so that's not there anymore, it becomes a much more attractive proposition, which is why at women's football, we are seen as a clean brand. So people like to get involved as partners. So you would like to think if alcohol and gambling are removed from that, it's a kind of blank sheet of paper. And you can say, well, what else can we actually do? So that argument about we need the money, no one's got any money to invest in sport, that's not actually true. They don't want to invest it because it's seen as a bit of a toxic brand. You know, we're speaking to a massive global organization about a kind of deal with us, and they as an organization globally will not sponsor men's sport. They did sponsor a World Cup winning team, men's. They said, well, we've hit the pinnacle of that, we are not touching men's sport now, and they sponsor 77 women and girls sports around the world, ranging from like kite surfing to football to whatever else, but that's their strategy now. It's just women's sport. So that's very interesting. I think there's certain people within men's football that are very uncomfortable with that and don't actually understand why that's happening. And it's all about being clean and being a more educational partnership than the toxicity of gambling and alcohol. So we're at a better place, I would say, from that perspective.
Thanks very much, Vivenne and Justina there. And I guess that we're very lucky in Scotland having that comparison. And obviously Scottish women's football is at the higher level, a smaller organisation than men's football in terms of supporters numbers. But nevertheless, it's a very striking contrast that we can hold up and use. I wanted to make one final plug for some of Richard and Nathan's earlier work. We've been talking about Henry spoke very well about why do the companies like it? It's because it's easy and the mass audience, and clearly a lot of that is the TV audience. And this idea that self-sponsorship, self-regulation of sponsorship protects children. When you've got an alcohol advert on a TV screen on a Saturday afternoon every 12 seconds, watched by, if not hundreds of thousands, certainly tens of thousands of children. I was trying to find some data on children TV habits, and it's very hard to find actually. But I did see something suggesting that the most watched TV channel by children between the ages of 7 and 16 is, guess what, Sky Sports. So I think the children and the vulnerable people in recovery are a good focus, as well as the population as a whole who have this problem. And there is plenty public support for us to do something about the alcohol problem. And I'm afraid, whilst I want you to support the Calling Time campaign, I have to call time on this meeting because we reached 12 o'clock. But thanks very much to all of you for coming along and listening and for participating. And we've all learned a lot, and we'll take this campaign forward.